Well, the month of August has now officially begun, which means that it is time to take a moment and reflect on everything that I read in the month of July. And it was a lot. July was actually a stellar month for me in terms of reading, which does not always happen. And so far, actually, this year of reading has gone so much better than last year. So I am very grateful for that. It means possibly that I spent more time reading in July than I should have, but it's okay. It's all water under the bridge now. What's done is done. Moving on. So anyway, welcome to my channel. My name is Anne, if you have not been here before, and this is In Search of Wonder. And I'm just going to take a second, well, more than a second, okay, to talk about what I read in the month of July. To begin with, I read 12 books in July, plus I DNF'd one. And that is a lot for me. 8 is sort of goals, if I have a goal. I don't really have a goal, but it's normal, let's say. Somewhere between 8 and 10. Anything over that is like, whoa, I read a lot that month. So this July was kind of like a, whoa, I read a lot month. And none of it was amazing. There were some that got really, really close, but none of it was like amazing, full on 5 stars. In fact, I haven't had a lot of 5-star reads this year so far, but I have read a lot of really good books. It wasn't a downer month at all. I started the month on vacation in Florida with my husband, and I did get some significant reading done on the plane and when we were traveling. And then the rest of the month, though, it's been kind of slower and quieter. I've been home a lot, and we wrapped up the month with my kid was sick one week, and then I was getting sick at the very tail end of the month. So anyway, a lot of downtime, a lot of time at home. So I guess eventually that translated into more reading, although at the time it didn't really feel like it. Enough about that. What are the books that I read? Well, a few of them were holdovers from the Red, White, and Blue TBR. Number 1 being 1776 by David McCullough. That was the nonfiction read that I chose, and I enjoyed it overall. I gave it 4 stars. I learned a lot about the boots on the ground, literally, aspect of the American Revolution, whereas most of the time when you're reading about the big figures in the American Revolution, you're reading about the politicians who are making the decisions and calling the shots and speaking the speeches and riling up the people and printing the pamphlets and all of that stuff, the movers and the shakers. But the war was actually won by the military, which was headed up by George Washington. And so this book, 1776, takes that perspective of George Washington and the American army, such as it was, and their fight against the British before the tide turned in our favor and we ended up winning the war. It's very difficult reading. There was a lot of struggle that the American army went through. It was not much of an army to start with. It was very ragtag and bedraggled and lacking in supplies, lacking in direction, lacking in discipline, lacking in good health, lacking in facilities, basically lacking in everything. And it's honestly a bit of a miracle that we won that war. And in fact, in that book, there are some descriptions. Now, David McCullough does not ascribe these events to God or to Providence. The people in that day definitely did. However, they saw the hand of God in certain events that were indeed miraculous. Other people, more secular people, might try to explain them away in more scientific terms, but it does seem like the hand of God was on the American army and blessing them in ways that maybe they didn't deserve and weren't really worthy of, but he had his own reasons for that. So anyway, It was interesting read, not the most compelling nonfiction I've ever read, but definitely interesting. And I would recommend it to anybody who is curious about the revolution and learning more about it, particularly that little slice of the American military life in 1776 and the battles that we fought with the British at that point. And another Red, White, and June holdover was A Worthy Risk by T. Elizabeth Renich. And I gave that 3.5 stars. And that one is about a family in England. And it's part family saga set in a couple decades before the Revolution, the American Revolution. There's a lot of family saga elements to it. It's very concerned with the various characters of this family, but primarily the perspective of the daughter of the family. There is a father, but he is ill in Italy. There is an elder son who's causing trouble for everybody. And then there's a mystery kind of surrounding him and his circumstances. There is a sinister neighbor who has evil plans in mind. There are some friends of the family who bring a lot of color to the story and also contribute to the plot. There is a portion of the family that ends up sailing across the ocean to the United States of America. Well, they were colonies at that point. And this was before the revolution happened, like I said, but things were starting to heat up in the States and there were starting to be complaints. And I think it was before the Stamp Act, but it was still like there was still tension there. And it is dealing with that. The French and Indian War has happened. And some of the members of this family fought on the British side of that war. So there's a lot going on. It is a little bit epic in its scope in some ways, both in the span of time and the, span of geography, the places they go. And it was very well done. Some of the writing was overdone for me, I think, in the end is the best way to put it. And I don't know how to put it, maybe like trying too hard, kind of, I guess. And I just didn't love the narration style, but I did enjoy the story. And there are more books in this series. I would not be opposed to reading more in this series. And I don't remember if I said this, but I gave it 3.5 stars. And then this wasn't necessarily for Red, White, and June, but I did want to read something patriotic for the 4th of July. And so I read Sparks Over Glenwood by C.P. Cabannis, and it was really cute. Very sweet. I loved it. It was a young adult romance, and it was set in Courtney said it was set, I believe, in the early 2000s, so 20-some years ago, and it was a simpler time, and it was just before, cell phones were really popular. If they wanted to do research, they had to go to the library to actually do the research, and, they rode around their bikes everywhere. At one point, the young man in the story gets a golf cart, and that's how they get around. It's set in South Carolina, in a small town, and it just has those vibes. And the romance itself was very sweet. And so I gave it 3.5 stars. There's not a lot of patriotic romance stories, so it was fun to read, set around a patriotic holiday. You have Valentine's Day stories and Christmas stories, but it was fun to read a patriotic one, especially in July. So I enjoyed that. Not Quite Darcy by Miss Kim Griffin. That was one of the disappointments of the month. Not that it was a bad story. I do think that there are plenty of people out there who would really love it. So I don't want to discourage anyone from picking it up. One thing I will say very positive about it is it has really strong faith elements that I don't think is very preachy. I think it comes across very practically through the story. The main character goes on a faith journey, and I think it's a journey of discovery for her and of uncovering and of understanding things that she had never considered before, and learning and growing and experiencing God's love through the hands of other people. And then in turn, being able to extend that love to someone else, learning how to forgive and how to move on. There were a lot of good things about it, a lot of good things. So I don't want to speak badly about it. It's just, there were a few things about it that I didn't personally love. It was not the sort of book fit to my tastes. Like contemporary stories are not my favorite typically to start with, but so there were some contemporary elements that I'm just, whatever. And then just the whole dating part of the story, I didn't love it. So it wasn't a favorite for me, but I do think that it's a great book that other people would enjoy. And then I read Austenland by Shannon Hale, and that was another bit of a ride. Now, here we're getting into Jane Austen July books, which I didn't necessarily seek to read from any of the prompts this year. I was just kind of pulling books from my Jane Austen shelf, books that were related to Jane Austen in some way, inspired by her, or retellings of her books, whatever. So obviously not quite Mr. Darcy was a sort of loose retelling of Pride and Prejudice, and which is why I read it. And then Austenland is more like paying homage to Jane Austen through the story. Various characters are kind of reflective of characters in the Austen books, and our main character in the story, whose name I forget, but she is in love with Mr. Darcy, specifically Colin Firth. It definitely is harking more to the 1995 BBC Pride and Prejudice than it is to the actual book, but it was still, it was a fun read. It was a little bit silly and a little bit zany, but it was fun. And then I also watched the adaptation of it. And honestly, this is, like, most people seem to like the movie better than the book. I actually think I liked the book better. I feel like the movie was just a little bit too farcical for my taste, but maybe it was just like a mood thing, because I could see that it was, pretty funny. But there were scenes in the movie that I really loved, that I thought were, very effectively played, more so maybe than the book. But in other ways, I thought the book was better. So if you mix the book and the movie, I'd have a perfect book there. Anyway, the next thing I read, I gave that one 3 stars. And then The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. And that was a book that gave me 5-star feelings. Even if I couldn't fully give it 5 stars, it gave me 5-star feelings. And it was compelling and engaging. So there's a young girl in this story, and she goes to live with foster parents in Germany. And well, she's German, but she's going to live with foster parents. And this is, right, it's kind of like in the middle of everything that's happening in World War II in terms of Germany, getting kind of close to the end, I guess, of World War II. This girl is kind of World War II through her eyes, and she is the eponymous book thief. There's a whole explanation as to how that happens, how she ends up, stealing books. And it has a lot to do with words and the power of words and the power of story and community. There is a really beautiful community that's created in this book. And the family that she lives with, they kind of are not in step with the Nazi party. And there are others in their neighborhood, with them who are also not in lockstep with the Nazi party. You get a glimpse of the differences of opinion that existed within the country and what that was like for them. Of course, it's nonfiction. I mean, it's fiction and it's imaginary, but kind of expands the horizons of thinking in that area. So I liked that. This German family gives shelter to a Jewish man, so he becomes a crucial part of the story, and he contributes to the overall kind of story within a story that's being written. So it's just really beautiful. It's moving. It's heartfelt. There is a decent amount of cussing, which was a kind of really the primary thing that kept me from giving it a full 5 stars, but I definitely had 5-star feelings reading the book. I will say, if you weren't aware of it already, that the book is narrated by Death. Death becomes a character who is narrating the story. That maybe wasn't as effective as some of the other narrative style techniques that were utilized in this telling of the story. Most of them I found very effective, but that one was a little bit also another reason why I didn't quite give it 5 stars. I'm not sure that it 100% worked the way the author was intending it to, but it did make for an interesting way of telling the story. And I read, and that was to go with Alma's Journey Through Time challenge to read a World War II, which was actually June's prompt, but I switched those. For my challenge, the Reading the Classics challenge, I was supposed to choose a red, white, and or blue cover and to read that. And it had to be an American classic, which is what I'm doing. It doesn't have to be an American classic. That's just like kind of like the extra level, the extra challenge. So I chose The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, which was a short story. I read it in like 45 minutes. And it was a very moving, it was very well written. I felt like I was there with that old man. And I gave it 4.5 stars. Again, kind of close to 5-star feelings. Just not quite there, but still, the kind of story that sticks with you a little bit and the kind of story that has a lot to say, even though it doesn't say a lot, And so it's about this old man in Cuba who has had a run of bad luck, a very long run of bad luck. He's not been able to catch any fish. He's living on barely nothing. There's this teenage boy who looks after him and takes care of him and makes sure he's being fed and who sees him as kind of his mentor. So this old man, Santiago, I think, he goes out one day and he's determined to break his string of poor luck. And so he comes across this fish, and it's a huge fish. And so he enters the fight of his life, and he finally catches the fish. And I'll stop there. Won't tell you any more of the story, but it's exploring a lot of themes, but part of it is about elderly person as they're getting older, they're getting past the prime of life, and what can they contribute to society? What is their purpose? And you see through the eyes of the young man, you can see what his purpose is, what Santiago's purpose is, even if he fails. He had that whole entire string of bad luck. Even when he is failing, he has a lot to still offer. Even if he doesn't have the same strength that he used to have and the same capability, he still is capable of doing, of teaching, of mentoring. There's a lot that the next generation can learn from him. So he still has purpose and things he can offer to people. So it was a beautiful story. 4.5 stars. And I read Miss Austen by Gill Hornby, and I gave that one 3.5 stars. And that one is about Cassandra Austen, and when she is older and she's on a quest to destroy any letters of Jane's that might have harmful things in them or might reveal too much. And so she goes to visit the home of her fiance who had passed away, where he grew up, but his brother and brother's wife had lived there in the intervening years. It was the parish house. And so she goes to that house after her would-be brother-in-law and sister-in-law had both passed away. And so she's wanting to go through their correspondence to retrieve anything from Jane. And so then there are other things happening. There are things happening with the daughter of the couple and her situation in life and what is going to happen with her after her parents have both died and she has to leave her home because it's going to the next vicar. And so there's that situation. There's some tension and issues with other surviving relatives. And so there's that present day kind of stuff going on. Well, present day being 1840, I think. And then there's flashbacks to Cassandra's younger years and things that she experienced. And then there are letters that she finds, both from Jean and from herself from the past. So you get multiple perspectives. And the big point of the story is, why did Cassandra destroy all of Jean's letters? And one of the reasons why I didn't give this book more stars or higher rating is because I didn't like how that topic was handled. It was sort of the whole point of the book, but in the end, the conclusion was underwhelming at best and frustrating, I guess, at worst. On top of that, there was some tweaking of historical events, not exactly historically accurate. We're like, what if, like little history bending going on, which wasn't terrible, but I mean, it was fine, but it wasn't great, So it wasn't like, oh wow, this is a really great book. Currently, I am watching the Miss Austen adaptation. I'm really enjoying it. They've changed some things from the book. I don't know necessarily for the better or for the worse, just made some changes, but I'm only halfway through that. So we'll reserve final judgment until I've seen the whole series. And then I read the Emma Manga Classics adaptation, and that was fun. I'm not a manga reader normally. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was a fun adaptation of Emma. And of course, I think most people know the storyline of Emma, kind of spoiled rich girl, tries to manage everybody's affairs, particularly her friend Harriet, and she tries to match Harriet up with all these guys, but then Harriet ends up falling for the one guy that Emma actually doesn't want her. And the manga, I mean, they do a good job with it. They stayed pretty true to Emma, to Austen's storyline and characters and development and all of that. So it was good. Enjoyable, fun. It was a fun adaptation. So again, that was for Jane Austen July, of course, as was Miss Austen. Oh, Miss Austen also counted for Chantal's Read Your Bookshelf Challenge because it was supposed to have a map in it, and that one had a map. And then I read a nonfiction, Eat to Beat Your Diet by Dr. William Lee, which was all about focusing on foods that are good for your metabolism, that kind of kickstart your metabolism. And I found it very interesting and informative. And so I think it's helpful to try to incorporate more of these foods into your diet and less foods that interrupt your metabolism or slow it down or stop it altogether, which you don't want, of course. So I found it pretty helpful. I gave that one 4 stars. And then I read Love and Freindship by Jane Austen for Jane Austen July, which is one of her juvenilia stories, which I have read before, but had been very many years. And so that is a wild ride, let me tell you. Jane wrote that story when she was 15 years old, and she wrote it in an epistolary format for the entertainment of her cousin. It's actually there's a funny little dedication to her cousin at the beginning. And I can just imagine the two of them giggling over the story. It's just so fun to imagine 15-year-old Jane giggling over the story with her cousin, because putting it in that context just makes it even more funny. 2 girls who are friends, but the one says to the other, when they're grown and they have daughters, the one says to the other, "Can you write to my daughter and tell her your story so, she can learn from you?" And so she's telling her story, but Jane Austen turns everything on its head, and nothing is what you would expect. And she's very much satirizing the popular stories of the day, the sentimental novels, and the sensibility of what is the word I'm looking for? I don't know, sensibility was all the rage, which was being overly emotional. There are various aspects of sensibility. There was a whole movement, a cultural thing that was going on at the time in England and Europe. And so she was mercilessly mocking this whole concept of sensibility. And I think if you understand that, it's even funnier. And if you can imagine the books that she is satirizing, it's just really funny. So anyway, it's short, really short. I read it again in an hour or something. And it was a lot of fun. So I guess I did give that one 5 stars. I mean, Austen, of course, naturally. And then I read Folly by Marion Chesney, or MC Beaton is another name she writes by. And I was disappointed in that one. I don't know how many stars I gave it. I think 2.5 stars. It was just poorly written. I'm going to try not to judge the author by that book, because I noticed in a lot of the reviews that quite a few other people were saying that they were surprised that that book made it past the editors because it was so poorly written. And on the other hand, you had some people who described it as being really well written. So I struggled with it. The actual story, the characters, there were some plot, I don't know about plot holes, but things about the plot that just raised questions in my mind, and I couldn't fully get on board with as being, plausible. But it was interesting how they made this house kind of like a character. The house was Mannerling was the name of the house. So the story is there's this family, because of the father's gambling debts. When he passes away, they have to leave their beautiful house. And so they're all desperate to get this house back. And so then there's a string of subsequent men who purchase the house. And so the daughters of the family are trying to make successful matches with the new owners of the house so they can get back in the house. It's part of a series And this particular book, one of the daughters falls in love with the guy who is currently renting the house, but then in the end, he decides not to keep it. And the house is like a character in the story, kind of. It's a little bit like, I don't know, not quite haunted, but like as if the house itself is trying to keep everybody away from it. Like, I don't know. Anyway, it was interesting, but it wasn't my favorite thing. And that was for Jane Austen July, like a Regency era story. And then I read Dear Jane Austen, a memoir, no, A Heroine's Guide to Life and Love by Patrice Hannon. That one, I didn't quite finish. I read about half of it so that it would qualify at the last minute for the deck of TBRathon. And it wasn't bad. It just was not a favorite. So what it was basically like Aunt Agony letters to Jane Austen, and Jane Austen is answering them and giving her advice. But the Aunt Agony letters are written from a contemporary perspective, like the 2000s or something. So modern life problems, right? And then Jane Austen is responding to them, which would be fine if it was just the letters and Jane's reply, because then Jane is like, some otherworldly, beyond the veil, writing with omniscient knowledge about stuff, right? The author made what I think is a crucial mistake and putting Jane Austen and tying all these letters together with a narrative of sorts, where Jane Austen is towards the end of her life and living at Chawton and interacting with her various family members in between the different letters. And then she sits down to write a letter, and she's sharing the letters with Henry, her brother, and with Cassandra, her sister, and with Martha, her friend, and getting their advice, to include in the letters that she's sending. But she's sending them to 21st century women. And I just could not wrap my brain around that. I could not. And so even though I felt like the letters were actually excellent in-depth character analysis of Jane Austen's characters, is essentially what they ended up being, and even to an extent plot analysis of Austen's work, and it was really well done in that respect, I couldn't keep going with it. So I read about half of it, and so it was interesting, but I couldn't finish it. So as I mentioned, I did do the Deck of TBRathon, which is a fun challenge I enjoy doing every year. So these are the books that I drew for that. And I ended up earning about 30 points for that. So, I don't know how that compares to other people. I didn't get a chance to watch the live at the end, but yeah, I was pretty happy about that. Yeah, so I won't go into all of the, the points and the prompts that I did for each one, but that was a fun readathon to participate in. And as I already mentioned, I participated in Jane Austen July as well, and actually did better than I thought I would, because I didn't have like really big intentions going into it. I just was like, I have all these Jane Austen books and I want to read some of them in the course of the month. And whatever I get done, I get done. And so in the end, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I read 6. And then there was the one that I DNF'd halfway through. So I feel like I got a lot accomplished. And I'm glad that I actually did read one by Jane Austen, which was The Love and Freindship, because I read all of her novels last year and I wasn't really keen on reading a whole one again this year, only because, I read them all last year. So probably next year I'll go back to it. But yeah, I had too many other books that I wanted to read. So I did read Love and Freindship, and I did read the Emma adaptation, which was pretty close to the original story. It's just, wasn't really that awesome. And then I'm continuing with The Passport to Summer Reading, and I added, that's by Chantal, and I added a couple things to that. The Old Man and the Sea, fit for the water prompt, and Sparks Over Glenwood, fit for the summer prompt, because it's set 4th of July, very summery feeling. The Book Thief, I put that for the prompt home, because it's very much centered on the home life of this girl and her foster parents and the Jewish man that they end up hiding. The setting is very narrow. It's largely in their home. It's also their street where they live, and it meanders over a couple times to another place in the town, but it's really very much centered on the home life. And so I picked it for home. And then for the Emma manga, I picked the flowers prompt, because the Emma manga classics had so many flowers all throughout. It was like very much a theme throughout the drawing of the whole book. Lots of flowers, which was actually really pretty. And then Folly by Marion Chesney, I picked country because it was set in the country, England country manor. And then For my summer book bingo, look at this. It's a very lopsided bingo board here. I've got 3 bingos. Yeah, 3 bingos, 2 down and 1 across the bottom. And these other ones up here are proving to be kind of difficult, the ones I haven't done yet. Nature, Second Chance, over 500 pages, Light Academia, Friend Rep, Translated, and Fire on the Cover. Struggling with those. But I don't know how much of them I will get done in August, but I'm enjoying working my way through this. So for youth, I put The Book Thief because the main character is a young girl. For short story novella, I added The Old Man and the Sea. For escapism, I put Austenland because not only is that like an escapist story, but in the book, the girl is like trying to escape her real life and she goes to Austenland. For friend group, I did Emma because it's all about her friend group in Highbury there. For Night, Sky, and Stars, I had Sparks over Glenwood. There are definitely a couple of scenes in that one, the pivotal scenes in the book, that are set outside at night. So, and then for not as popular, I did A Worthy Risk by T. Elizabeth Renich, only because I don't hear a lot of people talking about that author or her books. And a new to me author was 1776 by David McCullough because I've never read anything by him. Made definite progress on that. And I will show you my book tracker for the year. So I am actually, I'm really pleased with how many books I've read. I'm definitely going to get to 100 before the end of the year. Well, unless things change, which, anything can happen. So I already mentioned what I'd done for my reading challenges, except for Christian fiction bingo, Not Quite Mr. Darcy by Kim Griffin. Fit the prompt for set in Scotland or the United Kingdom because it was set in England, and cursive font. So the title was in a cursive font. So other than that, I don't think there's any other major goals that I accomplished or did in the month of July, other than just reading a lot of books and the reading challenges that I mentioned. So that was my reading for July. So I read a lot. A couple of them were really short books, which is part of right. I read a lot. And some of them were very, very good, really close to 5-star quality. None of them quite bumped up to that, but that's okay. It was pretty good reading overall. A couple disappointments, but all in all, looking back, I would say, yeah, pretty good reading month. Definitely enjoyed. How did your July reading go? Let me know in the comments, and let me know maybe what book was your favorite book and what was a disappointment that you had in July. Let's chat in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye.